Coming from abroad, you'll almost certainly be flying into and out of Colombo's Bandaranaike airport. By the way, you'll have to get used to long names in Sri Lanka. They're everywhere. Colombo's a city of almost 6 million people, but most tourists don't even spend a night here. Instead, they prefer to head out directly to the tea country or to the beach. But trust me, don't make that mistake. Take at least a day to see what the commercial and political heart of the country has to offer. You'll get a greater appreciation of the culture and energy of modern Sri Lanka from your time in the capital than your time anywhere else on the island. First, check out Gangaramaya Buddhist Temple. Completed in the late 1800s, it's one of the most prominent Buddhist temples in Colombo. Try to visit the site during the day if you can. With fewer people around, you can actually observe how devotees take their time at the temple and witness the impact that Buddhism has on the lives of most Sri Lankans. The temple is an eclectic complex. Different parts were built during different times by different people. Nestled in one area, you'll find a Bodhi tree, which is the same type of tree that the Buddha meditated under to achieve enlightenment. You might also see some Buddhist monks walking around. The temple houses an active Buddhist educational facility. And don't miss the elephant head in the main pavilion. In Africa, almost all male and female elephants grow tusks, but in Sri Lanka, less than 10% of only the male elephants do, so a tusker is very sacred. The Gangaramaya temple also has a room depicting a massive statue of Buddha with paintings of scenes from his life. The Buddha was born about 2,500 years ago as Siddhartha Gautama, a prince of a wealthy kingdom in what is now Nepal. His father, the king, had heard of a prophecy that the son would give up royal life and grow up to become a religious figure instead. Scared, the father sheltered Siddhartha in the palace and did not allow his son to see any human suffering or misery throughout his childhood. Finally, at the age of 29, Siddhartha left the palace for the first time, and he saw a sick man, an old man, and a dead man. As was prophesied, this experience shocked him, and Siddhartha gave up the throne to become a wandering monk. He meditated under a Bodhi tree, like we talked about, and achieved nirvana, or enlightenment. He realized that although life is suffering, with meditation, virtue, and good behavior, salvation is possible. This message has attracted disciples from all over the world. Today, over 500 million people globally are Buddhists, including Richard Gere and about 3 out of 4 Sri Lankans. Make sure you spend at least some time at the Seema Malaka part of the temple. Although it's technically part of the Gangaramaya complex, Seema Malaka is separate from the main area. The current version was built in the 1970s. It's located on a lake, and it's an island of tranquility surrounded by some of the tallest buildings and busiest streets in Colombo. The temple was designed by Geoffrey Bawa, Sri Lanka's most famous architect, and the guy whose country estate we're going to be visiting later. The construction costs, though, were covered by a prominent Sri Lankan Muslim family, and the temple even has some statues of Hindu gods. The place is a live example of the major religions of Sri Lanka interconnecting. Like Seema Malaka, Sri Lanka's new parliament building was also designed by Geoffrey Bawa, and both buildings are great examples of the architectural style known as tropical modernism. We'll talk more about that later. Obviously, a random tourist can't just walk inside Parliament, but it is worth looking out for the building as you drive around. I loved how distinctive the design is. It's a striking change from the Greco-Roman style buildings that still tend to dominate post-colonial architecture, even decades after independence. Speaking of independence, our next stop is Independence Square. This monument was built to commemorate Sri Lanka's 1948 independence from Great Britain. Sri Lanka has been inhabited for about 100,000 years. At various points, it was either ruled or influenced by South Indian, Southeast Asian, or Arab influences. The Portuguese, though, kicked off the era of European colonization in the 1500s. Originally, they just established a couple of forts to control trading routes, but over time they took over the coastal areas. By the mid-1600s, the Dutch had booted out the Portuguese and took over the coastal regions themselves. But again, neither the Dutch nor the Portuguese managed to fully subjugate the island. The interior kingdom of Kandy, that's Kandy with a K, managed to survive. In 1796, the British took over the island from the Dutch. At that time, the Netherlands were occupied by Napoleon, and the British were scared that if Sri Lanka, or Ceylon, as the island was named then, were to fall to the French, it would threaten British interests in South Asia. The British did succeed in finally conquering the Kingdom of Kandy in 1815, and therefore were able to unite the entire island under their rule. And fun fact, the design of the modern Independence Memorial Hall was actually based on the pavilion where the last king of Kandy signed away Sri Lankan sovereignty to the British way back in 1815. Sri Lanka remained a British colony for 150 years, but after World War II, colonialism wasn't really in vogue anymore. Sri Lanka became a self-governing dominion in 1948. This means that although the country had its own parliament and basically made its own laws, the Queen of England was still the figurehead head of state. Sri Lanka declared full independence from the UK in 1972. So today, it has both a president, who's the head of state, and a prime minister. And Independence Square has a statue of D.S. Senanayake, who was the first prime minister, right outside of the main hall. The hall is still used for a number of ceremonial functions today, especially by government officials. But when I visited during the middle of a weekday, it was basically empty. There were just a couple of security guards around to keep me company. Alright, by now it's hot and you're hungry, so it's time for a snack break. And when you're in South Asia, that can only mean one thing: mangoes. And if you don't live in the tropics, then trust me when I say that you haven't eaten a real mango until you've eaten a tropical mango. You can find over a dozen types of this fruit in Sri Lanka. I recommend just walking to a local fruit stall and asking for a couple to sample from the seller. Make sure you try the Alfonso mango and the sour mango in particular. You'll probably not have something like this where you're from. Alright, now that you're a bit better off and refreshed, we're going to still stick around in Colombo and head to Pettah Market. It's a bazaar near Sri Lanka's port. This area is my favorite part of the city. It's just full of vitality and energy. The area has a combination of open air and closed shops, selling just about anything and everything. Keep your wits about you though. This place can be intense. The traffic and commotion might be overwhelming. Many of the shops here are owned by Muslim traders, as has been the case for generations. And so probably not surprisingly, the most prominent building in the area is the Red Mosque. Its red and white stripes are hard to miss from the street. Walking distance from Pettah Market is the Fort Railway train station. If you're taking the train to go to other parts of Sri Lanka, you'll probably stop and start your journey here. It's simply beautiful. It's a Victorian-era station, and you can see the light reflecting off the trusses during sunrise and sunset. Even if you're not going or coming from anywhere, it's a photographer's paradise and totally worth a visit. The place is jam-packed during rush hour, and it's a real cross-section of how the urban middle class is going about their day in Colombo. Our next stop is Colombo Port. The port has been around for thousands of years, and it's one of the most important strategic choke points in South Asia. Today, Chinese, Indian, Japanese, and US interests are competing for control over the jetties, with the Chinese in particular injecting massive sums of money into expanding the port's trade capacity. The Chinese have made their investments in Colombo a major part of something called the Belt and Road Initiative. This initiative looks to finance infrastructure projects like roads, bridges, and ports in countries all around the world. It's a political and economic project. It wants to connect these countries to China. And to exert its soft power, the Chinese government has actually gotten a few Chinese social media stars to learn Sinhala, which is a local Sri Lankan language, in order to become influencers on the island. It's just amazing to see how important the social media game has become.
Electricity nasty karna eppa kiyala.
While near the port, you should also check out the Sri Kailaswanathan Kovil. By the way, the word Kovil means Hindu temple in Sri Lanka. So just using the word temple means Buddhist temple, but the word Kovil, which comes from Tamil, an Indian language, means Hindu temple. You'll have to take unpaved back streets to get to this Kovil, making it a bit of a hidden jewel. It's an active religious site and doesn't get many tourists, which to me makes it all the more special. I was lucky enough to catch the tail end of a prayer when I visited inside. The temple has an impressive entrance tower with carvings of Hindu gods. This entrance tower is called a Gopuram, and it is a distinctive feature of Hindu temples from South India. It's a monument to the impact that waves of migrations of Tamils, who are an ethnic group with their own language originally from South India, have had on the island itself. You'll see these kovils scattered throughout Sri Lanka, with many of them being in the north, where Tamils are more prominent. The original Kovil structure was built in the late 1700s, but it's been rebuilt and expanded several times. I love being at the temple as the sun set, with the commercial skyline of New Colombo providing a great backdrop to the Gopuram. As the sun sets, Galle Face Green is a great place to take in the view. It's a long park and beach that faces the ocean, and it's got a lot of street vendors selling street food along the beach. A lot of Sri Lanka's largest and newest hotels are located along Galle Face Green, so you might even be able to walk to the beach depending on where you're staying. Try and grab a drink at the 150-year-old Galle Face Hotel, Colombo's most prominent place to see and be seen. When I went, the place was crawling with police, because the president actually happened to be there to catch a wedding. Head downstairs and get a table with an ocean view. And when you're there, get a cocktail made with Ceylon Arak, which is Sri Lanka's native alcohol. Arak is made from the sap of coconut palm flowers and tastes a lot like whiskey. Make sure you get the expensive kind though. Cheap Arak, like cheap vodka and, well, cheap anything, will really give you a horrible hangover. But, well, either the cheap or the expensive kind will get the job done. For dinner and some nightlife, we're heading now over to the Dutch Hospital, which is an old colonial hospital as the name indicates, that's been turned into a shopping and dining district. The building was constructed in the late 1600s, but much of the original site was destroyed in a bombing during the Sri Lankan Civil War in the last 20 years. It's now been restored and houses some boutique shops, bars, and the best restaurant in Sri Lanka, the Ministry of Crab. The Ministry of Crab is regularly ranked as one of the best restaurants in the world, and it's part owned by two of the greatest cricket players in Sri Lanka's history, Mahela Jayawardena and Kumara Sangakkara. Say that 10 times quickly. These two helped Sri Lanka, which is a small country, win the Cricket World Cup in 1996 and place second in 2011. They're probably the two most popular people on the island.
Century made when the chips were down by a fantastic batsman.
But back to the food. You can choose the size and preparation method of the crab, with the Crabzilla size weighing in at 2 kilograms or around 4.5 pounds. You do need to call for a reservation in advance, but trust me, the experience is worth the hassle.